Hi everyone, I'm Jack the Rambling Raconteur, and I hope that you're doing well. I want to share some thoughts on Fish in Exile by Vi Khi Nao, who's originally from Vietnam. She's since immigrated to the US. She's written a couple of short story collections, but this was her first novel a couple of years ago. And it's a very provocative book. It's very unconventional in terms of its structure, but it's an exploration of grief. And so while the book has this very unusual structure, there's a heavy emphasis on dialogue to the point where at times it almost reads like a philosophical dialogue. We have characters' names and then a colon and just what they're saying and just pages and passages of that. At other times, it's a book that's deeply poetic in its exploration of grief. And so it's unconventional, but it's exploring this very ancient theme across the human condition, specifically the grief that comes with the loss of a child and the real horror that ensues there. So I wanted to give a passage that just tries to capture what this is like right off the bat. I must think of myself first and get ahead. But the word ahead makes me sound like a sadist. Ahead? Someone's head, it seems to imply. Get ahead. Outside, the wind is blowing leaves and dust across the meridian. The toilet hasn't completely dissolved the macerated toilet paper. At the bottom, a puff of cloud suspended. And so we already are getting like this sense that we're fusing poetry, deep philosophy, and very, very real quotidian reality all together in the book. And that is, it's a cauldron of that across the book. Vi Khi Nao is very specific in the allusions to Greek tragedy, which makes sense with this exploration of grief. We have characters who are named Ethos, Callisto, another is named Catholic for this sense of universal. And so Vi Khi Nao is very specific in terms of the references, the allusions, the connections she wants to make. In terms of the exploration of grief, particularly the beginning and ending chapters, which each chapter has a different point of view character or pair of characters narrating it. The first one is from the father, the final one is from the mother, and we see their recollection, their memory as they try to move forward having lost their two children, and how they're relating to each other, how they're relating to themselves in this loss. And it's a very tragic book. It's tapping into the deep horror and emotion that would exist in an experience like that. Honestly, one that I truly hope I never experience. But Vi Khi Nao is capturing that, I think, as well as anybody can on paper. It's a book that reminded me in a lot of ways of Toni Morrison's Beloved in that respect. Or in terms of the deep ironies that exist across the book in terms of Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. So a later example, this is a book though that's confronting pain, confronting grief straight on. You begin to sense that your pain is not only desired by them, but also celebrated by others. You want to set a birthday cake out quietly for your pain. Blow all the candles out for your pain. Make a wish. You think pain is exquisite. So exquisite that when you crawl under your covers, you want to lock it between your palms so it doesn't escape, and so no light can get in and make you happy. You think happiness is too dangerous for your pain, so you're as possessive as possible. You don't think you and pain can be lovers. After all, requited love is just too much. Too much reciprocation will make you subdued and even banal. It will turn you into wallpaper, and there's something terribly wrong with too much reciprocation and too much wallpaper. So you try hard not to get along so well with your pain. You try to make your pain less agreeable, but you and pain become lovers anyway. And that reconciliation of loss with the present and the future, and that bridge forward is something that these characters are striving through. There's a deep psychological insight to it. Vi Khi Nao gives us these characters, and she writes them in such a way that, particularly with Ethos and Catholic, the father and mother at the beginning and end, we are really capturing a sense not just of who they are and who they could have been as parents or who they are now as these bereaved parents, but who they are in relation to each other as husband and wife, and how much their relationship has changed, how deep the fractures run for them. And so the psychology of the book, again, it's very painful to read and experience, but I think it's very authentic. She's capturing it so well. So I wanted to give one more example of reading, just with the way that dialogue works, how quickly it moves, about how intensely it moves. This is from Catholic. Do you think that if an old man takes something from a young person, the thief should have the decency to return it, or at least replace it with something else? I don't know how to answer that. Why, did a coworker steal something of yours from the fridge? Your pineapple yogurt, but a thief? When God took Adam's rib to create Eve, what did he replace it with? And why did God drug Adam into a stupor like it was some kind of date rape challenge and then steal his rib? Well, he sort of replaced it. But how, Ethos? The replacement came in the form of Eve. Well, shouldn't he have at least asked Adam if that was okay? A thief usually doesn't ask for permission to, but there's a law of volition that governs the universe, right? Of course there is, but that's just one of many ontological views. Did someone steal something from you at work? Those champagne glasses were antiques. No, the glasses are still there. Thank goodness. Why did God steal the children from us? Why didn't he ask us if it was okay before he shoplifted them? If he had asked, would you have just handed them over? If he asked, yes, of course. And ultimately, the final line of that long conversation is Catholic saying to her husband, please don't touch me anymore. And constantly we have these deep discussions, and then immediately Vi Khi Nao snaps us back into the reality of human relationships. And so as a book, it fuses that so well. But again, it's a book that is dealing with a very specific type of grief, a very specific type of horror. So just please be aware of that before reading this. But I found it to be a very moving work to read. At times they try to construct an aquarium and have fish that are their pets, and that they then want to dress in ways. And so the imagination that exists across this book and the connections it's drawing are really, really fascinating. So of course I was reminded 100% of Euripides, specifically even works like Hippolytus or Medea, several of which have been translated by Anne Carson in Grief Lessons. I was reminded, as I mentioned, of course, of Beloved by Toni Morrison. I think that connection speaks for itself. I was reminded of Ariana Harwicz, particularly in Die My Love. I'll be reading Feebleminded later this year, but in Die My Love, where we have a new parent who's experiencing this real psychological trauma as a young mother, and trying to figure out who she'll be moving forward. Here we have a mother who's experienced loss, trying to figure out who she is moving forward. But that same deep, authentic emotion I felt was really well captured. I was reminded, as mentioned, of As I Lay Dying by Faulkner. The horror and the deep psychological horror that's in Last Words from Montmartre by Chi Miao-jin. Baboon from Naya Marie Ait. And here we don't so much have loss, we have fractured relationships though, and I think that was the connection I was seeing. Certain plays from Ibsen, probably The Wild Duck most strongly. Certain plays from Harold Pinter, in terms of this sort of comedy of horror that's going on, where there are characters who say things that seem to be funny, but when examined, everybody's just making this desperate joke just to almost have a reason to wake up the next morning. A random connection was that a couple of films were mentioned, one of which was the adaptation of Satantango from Krasznahorkai. And then, of course, the Greek mythical connections were profuse and wonderful across this work. So I'd be curious to know if anyone has read any of Vi Khi Nao's other works, if anybody else has read Fish in Exile, and I will certainly be looking for more of her work. So thanks, everybody. Bye.